Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Path of Maximum Resistance. Today is the beginning of Memorial Day weekend in 2018, believe it or not, 2018. And as it is Memorial Day weekend, I think it's appropriate that we have a military-themed subject today, which we will. I'm going to talk about the Army Special Forces. I think since it's a topic that I'm obsessed with, I could talk about any detail of it to excess, I guess you could say. I could just elaborate on any little aspect of Special Forces because it's something I've been obsessed with for over a decade. I could just go on forever. So I think specifically what I'm going to kind of talk about, instead of going into stories of any interactions I had with them outside of my training, or things I've seen them do, or any research I've done on them, or too much stuff like that, I think specifically I'm just going to talk about my dream of making it SF, my failure to do so, the ramifications of that failure on the rest of my life, because it's definitely has had a consequential impact for sure, of which I am still sort of reeling and playing out. And then also just going to talk to you a bit about the actual training courses, the actual SF training courses, because I think for those of you who haven't experienced anything like that, that might be the part that's actually most interesting to you, is what it's actually like being at Fort Bragg, going through one of the most intense military, or one of the most physically demanding, arduous military courses there is, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Some of the training I actually did with the National Guard Special Forces guys, which was actually much more demanding than anything I even experienced at selection. Those guys are animals, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. That's all going to be fun. So I think I'm going to specifically just talk about my experience in general, and hopefully keep it kind of focused, because I'll tell you, I actually had some hesitance about broaching this subject, because it is one that I'm so into that I'm afraid I might not be able to keep my focus, and I might elaborate on anyone, sort of tumble down one rabbit hole and just get going, and we might be here all day. So I hope I don't do that, but if I do, all I can say is, hey, bear with me. Maybe you can, once this gets posted up on SoundCloud, you can kind of have this playing in the background of your Memorial Day travels, while you're flying. Maybe you can just hear me rambling in the background, or your speakers of your car while you're road tripping. I don't know, because in the past few episodes, I've been kind of trying to keep them relatively brief, and I can't promise that this is going to be the same. It's just it's a topic that's just too interesting to me for me to not flesh it out in the ways that I want. It's one I can't shortchange. It's I don't know, if your passion is music and you start talking about music, you can't just talk a little bit about one artist. You need to just go on and talk about the whole industry and the history, and it's just, that's what happens when you're passionate about something, right? So that's sort of the agenda. But first, I do want to kind of mention, of course, Memorial Day weekend. It is super significant, of course. And I think the best way of sort of tackling it is by saying something that I don't think is any different than what any other living veteran would probably say. And that's to remind everyone that this particular holiday isn't about, living veterans. It's about those who sacrificed. And of course, none of us want to be sort of holier than thou, right? We get it. Memorial Day weekend's the kickoff of the summer. It's all about really barbecuing and swimming and having a good time, partying, cracking open some beers, doing whatever you do. But at the same time, I do think it's important to remember why we have Memorial Day weekend, and that it's not Veterans Day. It is a weekend, or a day at least, for remembering those who did sacrifice. And all I'm going to say, and I'm going to try to keep this super brief, because I didn't give this specific podcast a whole lot of thought, just because the topic, being Special Forces, is so near and dear to my heart. It's not one I had to really pre-plan for. It's going to be super raw, and it's just going to come straight kind of from the top of my head, because it's something I think about constantly anyway. But that being said, so I didn't give a lot of thought to the message I wanted to sort of present for Memorial Day, but I did think that I didn't want to single out anyone who sacrificed, at least not during the missions I was on, or while I was deployed, just because my thought is that I hope that instead of bringing attention to those people passing and the events that occurred that that caused them to actually make that sacrifice, I hope instead their families during this weekend are able to think about the lives that those soldiers lived, and instead of the event of them actually giving their lives, I hope instead they could think about the lives that they actually led up until then, and have more positive, happy thoughts about it. And I'm just afraid if I specifically identify anyone. It would bring back memories that would just sort of go down a path I don't want to go. But instead, I hope we can bring attention to all of the great lives that these people lived, before doing what they had to do. So I don't know. I guess that's my hope. I hope for the families of those who have lost soldiers that at least this one weekend they have to carry the burden of that loss every day. So I hope like there's this weekend, or at least they find some time to just reflect back on the good things. And with that, that's all I'm really going to say about it. And I will continue on with the subject of the day, Special Forces, and I will tell you that I actually have a prop today. So if you are listening to this on SoundCloud, you're going to miss out. Not that it's super important, but down by my feet, you don't see it yet. It'll get presented at the appropriate time, but there is a prop during today's episode. So I guess that's a bit of a tease. Get you excited. I know you guys are all fired up now, knowing that there's a prop. Cool. All right. So like I said, I didn't give this a whole lot of thought, so I don't even know where I'm going to start. So we're just going to, kick it off to whatever first comes into my head. So let me tell you that when I first joined the Army, I actually wanted to be a Ranger. And I'm not going to, like I said, I want to talk specifically about my experiences, so I'm not going to get too much into the minutia. But for those of you who know nothing about the community, Special Forces are a specific group within the Army. So within the military community at large, there's Special Operations Command, and so there's special operators of different breeds. You have Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, pararescue guys. The Marines now have their own MARSOC unit. So there's lots of different special operators, but the Special Forces themselves, the Green Berets, are a specific group of people. And they're in the Army, and they have a very specific mission. And the reason I wanted to join them wasn't just because they were super cool, which they were, and they got to do cool things, and they got the coolest missions, and they were just super admirable in everything I saw them do while I was in the service. It was because I really was intrigued by their mission set. So I told you that when I first joined, I wanted to be a Ranger. And Rangers are known for like their direct action. What Rangers are is just an elite infantry fighting force. I mean, that shortchanges what they are. They're more than that, but to sort of juxtapose or sort of make a dichotomy difference between what they are and what the Green Berets are, they're more of an elite direct action fighting force, whereas the Special Forces guys do that as well, but their primary mission really, well, they have a broad mission set, but one of the things that they pride themselves on, the Special Forces do, is their ability to conduct foreign internal defense, FID. It's called FID. Foreign internal defense is basically, what that means is that your Special Forces guys who operate in 12-man teams called ODAs, they all are very culturally knowledgeable about a specific region that they're orientated to. So the idea is that on your 12-man team, you all would speak the language of the region that you're probably going to participate in. So if you are a team that's going to deploy to Iraq very often, you probably are very culturally knowledgeable about Arabic. And you probably, you have at least a couple Arabic speakers on the team. Everyone knows Arabic pretty roughly. You've been trained in Arabic, and that's sort of the idea. So what always intrigued me is that not only were the Special Forces, did they have to go through a very rigorous physical qualification process, but they're also intellectually like superior soldiers. Like there was demands on your intellect. Like you really have to be a intellectually gifted person in a sense. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say like every SF guy is Einstein, right? But like, you do have to have some worldliness to you and at least the cultural sensibility to be able to operate as almost like a warrior diplomat. And all of that just fascinates me. I think that's the coolest mission set in the whole world, and especially deploying on a 12-man team where you're basically like conducting American foreign policy totally autonomously. That's the responsibility in that is just amazing. So that's sort of my fascination. I really wanted to make it SF. That's all I really ever wanted to do when I got into active duty. I shouldn't say I was deterred from going to Special Forces training while I was active duty because I kept getting deployed. As soon as I got to Fort Stewart, as soon as I got to my active duty station, we immediately deployed to Kuwait. So obviously I couldn't go to selection then. Once we got back, it's not totally true that I couldn't go to selection right when I got back from Iraq the first time. I probably could have went, but I was busy drinking all the time, getting in trouble, as I've elaborated on in other episodes. and then I got stationed in South Korea. And even from South Korea, you can go to selection. But then again, priority-wise, I was focused on partying. Though it was a dream, like I've never been good at, sort of sidetracking my recreational activities and having fun and focusing on my professional, no matter how important they are to me. I sometimes, or very often, and maybe still have my priorities out of line. And ultimately, maybe we'll find that's what ended up derailing my dreams, though maybe not. But yeah, it's kind of a teaser to what's upcoming. But anyway, so during my 3.5 or almost 4 years on active duty, I never really got a chance to go to selection. And I'll kind of mention that to you. So the way the SF training pipeline works, and again, anytime I mention SF, I'm talking Special Forces. And the way this works is, so basically you have to go and you have to apply to go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, which is a 24-day, and it fluctuates. It's been dropped down to 18 days. It's been longer, but typically it's about 24 days. And when I went, it was 24 days. It's exactly what it says it is. It's a selection and assessment course that's held in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is just this really deeply forested mountainous, not mountainous like Rocky Mountain, craggy, steep hills, but mountainous like the Appalachian Mountains. So it's all inclined, very thick vegetation, tree, coniferous sort of green area in North Carolina. And actually the course is held in Camp McCall, which is actually an old World War II like Army air base that's actually outside of Fort Bragg. It's way out in like the boondocks. But so you're totally secluded from everyone. And what you do is you go to this selection course, and the whole idea is you just go there and they're selecting the people that it's actually, so the whole course is ran by Special Forces, qualified individuals. And they're basically selecting the people who they think will be able to make it through the actual qualification to become Special Forces and join their team. So they're basically like, it's a really cool process because they're selecting the people who will then in the future fight beside them. So your cadre has like an ingrained and inherent sort of inherent responsibility to the process because they're literally picking the people who they will depend on in combat in the future. So like once you get to Fort Bragg and you start like, or even before that, once you start working with the SF guys and you start like, you make it known that you want to go into that, they call it the training curriculum, the pipeline, you're always being judged. You're constantly like, you're immediately in the Brotherhood in the sense of, like, you're not in the Brotherhood that you are with the Special Forces guys, but you're in the Brotherhood in the sense that you're being assessed constantly, because this is truly, unlike where this is sometimes said as a cliche, this is truly a life or death thing. Like, these guys are truly deciding on who's going to join their teams to do some of the most elite missions around the world. So, yeah, this is like the best of the best, and it's really cool, and it's really awesome. So, the first thing you do is you go to this 24-day selection and assessment course in Fort Bragg. And the basic idea of assessment and selection is, well, the primary focus is on land navigation. And then in a greater context, I'll tell you that the primary sort of physical demand, the way that they try to break you and the way they try to determine your willpower and your dedication is through an act called ruck marching. And that's actually, I think, makes it appropriate time to bring in our prop, which I will show you. This is what an army rucksack used to look like. And for some of you who are in the military now, you're looking at this and you're like, that is ancient. But I'm telling you, up until maybe 10 years ago, we were still carrying these bags. These are called Alice packs. They've been since replaced by what's called the Molly system, which is a modular, less sort of torturous device than this one. But the way selection works is you basically load this thing up with, well, at selection, actually, honestly, you only have to load it with 45 pounds dry, which means before you put water and food into it. So you put 45 pounds in there, then you load it up with water and food, and by the time you're done, you have about 60 pounds in there. And to tell you what 60 pounds on your back feels like, I mean, it sucks. But as a forward observer, especially in South Korea, I had ruck marches where I had over 100 pounds on my back. Like, that was pretty common just because the equipment we had to wear going to the observation post. So at selection, it's not that the amount of weight that you have on your back is anything that you haven't experienced before. It's that you have a rucksack on like the entire time. It's a 24-day course, and you are rucking basically every single day. In every event, you find a way of incorporating rucksack marching into it, and you constantly have that bag on your back, which makes sense because in real life mission sets, when you're on a 12-man team, there's a good chance you might be infiltrated into a location where you have to put everything you'll need for, say, a 2-week period. Maybe not quite a 2-week period, but for a long duration of time, you'll have to put everything on your back. So if all else fails, you at least need to be able to carry your livelihood in and out of a mission set. And also land navigation, and maybe now it's I don't know how selection has changed in reflection of modern technology, but the idea is that a special forces person, and I say special forces guy just because it was restricted to just males when I went through, and that might be different now. But so a special forces dude should never be lost is the idea. So long as you have a compass and a map, you should be able to figure out where you're going and get your way out of there. So this entire 24-day course is basically to challenge your land navigation skills. And more so, they actually teach you land navigation at selection. Like, they set you up to succeed. Like, it's mind games, but it's not mind games in the childish sense. Like, they want you to succeed. Like, if you're someone who can help the special forces, they want you to join. Like, they need people. So they do make it so that it's passable. Like, there's nothing that, if you train and you are physically prepared to go to selection and you had the mental fortitude to make it through, and the guts to do it, you can, like, there's nothing there. It's not like you're going to get there and they're going to ask you some mathematical problem that you just can't cognitively figure out. Like, everything that is required of you at selection, so long as you have the willpower to do it, you could successfully make it through selection. Now, the thing with selection is that it's 24-day course, and that even though if you make it through the entire course, 24 days, you might not be selected. In fact, I would say most people aren't selected. You have people who make it through the course who are not, they call them 24-day non-selects, which means they made it through the course, but the cadre said, hey, we just don't think that you either are the personality that we want in special forces, or maybe you just aren't mature enough now, so come back later, which sucks for those guys because they have to go through selection again. But for whatever reason, you might physically make it through the course, and the SF guys might just not choose you, which sucks. And then in the case like when I went, it came to be because of the way the personnel staffing was happening at the time. There was really no need for officers. As you might know, in the military, there's enlisted and then there's commissioned officers. And on SF teams, there's only one officer on every team. So you have a 12-man team, and on every 12-man team, there's one officer and one warrant officer. But again, only one commissioned officer. So at any given time, and then there's, of course, 10 enlisted guys, excluding that one warrant officer and that one commissioned officer. So there's a need for many, many enlisted SF guys, but not a need for so many officers. So actually, when I went through selection, the interesting part is that the officers who made it through, all the ones who physically made it through the course, only one got selected. And in fact, they ended up telling the officers, they're like, we don't know how to break this to you, but we actually don't need any officers right now. And there was really no chance of any of you making it. They really broke it down to him like that. And they did select that one guy because he was just such a superstar. Like, they couldn't deny him. Like, he was like Rambo. They had to take him. But everyone else who did really well, like, I actually had a friend, and maybe I'll get to that story later, but I actually ran into someone at selection who I knew from college, and he was an officer at that point, and he made it. And he was a 24-day non-select. And what's even worse for those guys is that if you're enlisted, you can continue to go through selection. You can try again. So long as you have a memorandum from the cadre saying that they welcome you back, you can go back. But for officers, they typically only have one shot. It's based on their year group, which is a different story. But they basically, long story short, have one shot. So if it just happened to be a time where they didn't need officers is when you went to selection and you're an officer, you're just out of luck, and that's really unfortunate. That sucks, especially given how much people train for it, and they don't tell you beforehand. Like, you just go through and you find out afterwards that, we never need you in the first place. It's just the way it's not a game. I don't want to say it's how the game works. It's just for necessity. It's how they have to run it. Like, there has to be some secrecy. There has to be some mental challenge to it that they have to shroud a lot of it in secrecy just to keep it, because something about going to selection, something that does challenge people, is the mental deception to it all. Like, I'll give you another quick example, and I do want to go back because I actually jumped ahead in the story when there's a lot more pretext to give you before we even get to this point. But I'll tell you one of the interesting things about selection. If you know anything about the military, if you've been to the military or you've read stories or you've seen like Arlie Ermy, who, God rest his soul now, you've seen what basic training looks like. You're used to seeing military personnel constantly getting yelled at and berated. What's different about selection is you're treated like an adult, but being treated like an adult also has some weird consequences, and let me kind of go on. First of all, at selection, the candidates do not wear rank. So an enlisted person can't tell who the officers are. The officers can't tell who the enlisted are. No one knows, like, if you outrank me, and basically everyone's on like a first name basis. There's no insignia on your uniform. It's totally a they call a sterilized uniform. And the whole idea is that they're supposed to be assessing you based on your ability, not necessarily your past experience or anything else. The cadre is supposed to be looking at the whole man and deciding, outside of rank, outside of, past experience, can this person help the special forces? Though, as you're going through the course, you get to know people, you know their backgrounds, and you find out. But that's one of the interesting things is that as you're going through special forces assessment and selection, there's also no feedback. So you never know if you're doing well. You never know if you're doing poorly. Obviously, you know how you finish in events. Like, I can honestly say, and this is something I'm very proud of, as much as I will, I don't want to bury I guess I do want to bury the lead, so I'm not going to do a spoiler alert here and tell you what ultimately happens, so you might be able to figure it out. But, so I'll be very honest with the outcome of what ended up happening, but I will tell you this in my own defense, that, while I was actually at selection, I was doing super well. Like, I was really physically prepared, and I'll say that I was probably in the top 5 of every event. So you do know, in the sense that, like, if there's a forced ruck march and everyone's told to go ruck march out a certain distance and you finish first, well, I finished first, I'm probably doing pretty well. On the other hand, say, for example, you do this obstacle course. At selection, there's an obstacle course, a really famous obstacle course called the Nasty Nick. Nick, the name Nick is actually in honor of Nick Rowe, who was a Vietnam veteran, of the Vietnam War, and he was a prisoner who escaped, or I think attempted escape. I don't remember the full story now, but he's one of the most esteemed like special forces guys ever, Nick Rowe. So this obstacle course is named in honor of him, and it's just well known. It's a crazy obstacle course, and to be honest with you, most people don't complete every event in the obstacle course. It's so demanding. There's so many ropes that you have to climb that you eventually are going to hit physical exhaustion. And really, the whole assessment is to see what happens when you do reach your very limit. And what I'm getting at is that the cadre, they provide no feedback. So like in my case, so I'm doing the Nasty Nick. I'm doing pretty well. Like, I wasn't as good at the Nasty Nick as I was at ruck marching. Like, I do feel like I finished in the top 5 of all ruck marches and runs. Nasty Nick, though, I was challenged. And I finally got to a rope that I just couldn't make it up. And I should tell you, before I got to this rope, you climb so many ropes. And they also are testing, like, your fear of heights. So you'll have to, like, not repel, but, like, kind of shimmy along ropes that are really high up just to see if you would do it. Because some people do tense up and they just refuse to do it. They also test to see if you're claustrophobic. So there's some tunnels that you have to go really deep into, and then you have to climb a rope, even though you can like use your feet up against the wall. So it's not all upper body. It's the test to see if you like freak out when you're like 50 feet below ground in a tunnel. I had no problem with that, but doing all these ropes, I exhausted my upper body. Come to find out that if you're more coordinated than I am, and I'm not particularly coordinated, I'm just not. There's ways of climbing a rope with technique where you use all feet. You wrap the rope around your feet in a certain way, where I've seen people climb rope where they barely, like, they'll literally take their hands off the rope and balance themselves and then put their hands back on the rope and then push themselves up with their feet, and they extend the rope by using their feet. I always brute forced it and just used my upper body. I would practice. I literally, when I was training for selection, I had a rope on a tree and I would climb it all the time to get practice, and I just could never master this technique. Like, it just evaded me. So I would always be like, screw it, I'm just going to work on my body so much, I'll be able to climb every rope. And ultimately at the Nasty Nick, I got to a rope, I couldn't make it up. I kept trying. And so cadre is standing right there. And if you know the Army, like, if you can't make it through an obstacle, soldiers, the whole thing about the Army is they're always trying to make their test and everything sort of conditioned to the least capable performer. But in SF, it's totally different. So like in the regular army, if you get to an obstacle or you get to an objective, or you get to an apparatus in an obstacle course that you can't overcome, you would just ask Cadre. Cadre would be like, "Well, do this," and like, or just avoid it, go around it, soldier. They would give you a reasonable response. Cadre at selection, when you can't make it up the rope. So like I'm standing there and I look over at Cadre and I'm like, well, what do I do? Because they don't tell you. They don't tell you, well, hey, if you can't make it up, like keep going. They don't tell you get off the course. Like you have no idea. So I can't make it up this rope. And I look over at Cadre and I'm like, so what do I do? And his only reaction is, do what you think is best, candidate. And that's how they refer to you at selection. They refer to everyone as candidates. And also you have like a roll number. So they might say, do what you think is best, candidate 192 or whatever your number might be. And that's it. Like they give you no other guidance. Just do what you think is best. So in my case, I just ended up going around the rope and continuing on the course, and I completed the course. And there's no like after action report after you're done with the course. They don't tell you, well, you failed to do that rope, therefore you will not be selected for Special Forces training. So you go through the rest of the 24-day selection, and in your head, you might be thinking to yourself, man, I'm screwed because I didn't make it up that one rope. When in reality, they might not even have cared about that rope. Or you might be going through the rest of the selection thinking, they didn't care about that rope. And you might smoke everything else and come to find out that because you didn't have the willpower to make it up that one rope, they ultimately end up not selecting you. So they do like cognitively mess with you in that way, just by the absence of feedback. So now I told you a bit about selection. I want to actually go back because I told you I didn't actually go through selection via active duty army. I actually went through the National Guard, and man, I could tell you so much here, especially some stuff that's not so personally. What's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't really put me in the best light, but I'm going to tell you a few stories and hopefully keep it somewhat within a reasonable length of time here. But I actually was scheduled to go to selection twice, and got cold feet the first time, and the second time I ultimately went, and we'll get to what ended up happening. But I can tell you, so the way that you go to Special Forces Assessment Selection through the National Guard is crazy. And let me tell you that the physical demands that the National Guard Special Forces guys put on us was so much worse than anything I experienced at selection. It was insane. So let me tell you, when I got to selection, I was super prepared because what the National Guard guys had put us through, we were like, man, selection's cake. And physically, like, ultimately my result at selection wasn't because of a physical thing. It was mental. But we'll get to it. So basically, so what happens is you join the National Guard, you get permission from your local unit to go train with the SF guys. And what the SF guys make you do is you have to go to 3 drill weekends with them where you pass to their satisfaction their little selection course. They've changed that now. Nowadays, they have a thing called Safari where you just go once and you just have to pass it once. But back when I was going, you had to pass in 3 consecutive months. You had to pass what was basically like a mini selection with the National Guard guys. And my first experience doing that was with 3rd Battalion, 20th Special Forces Group of the Florida National Guard. And those dudes were maniacs. I can't even tell you. So this was in Camp Blanding, which is a National Guard training base up by Jacksonville, Florida. And just to give you an idea, so first of all, I'll tell you, you had to pass 3 drills where you were up to their satisfaction, and then they would get the funding for you, and they would actually send you the selection. In my case, I actually passed the 3 drills. In my very first 3 drills, I went and trained with them. But then my security clearance, you need a secret security clearance to go to the selection. Actually, I had a secret security clearance, and you need a top secret, I think, to go to the Q course. And I had a secret clearance at the time, but for some reason there was trouble getting the funding or something to send me the selection. So I did my 3 training courses, but there was a long lag before I could go to the selection. And so instead, I hated the National Guard with a passion. Like, I hated the National Guard. Like, my regular unit, I can't even tell you how much I hated it. Like, I just hated going. So I actually kept training with the SF guys instead of going back to my old unit. They'd be like, you need to go back to your old unit. I'd be like, no, don't send me. Like, just let me go here. Just let me train with you guys. So it got to the point where actually with 3rd of the 20th, I was almost for like some drill weekends, I was almost like they wouldn't even make me do all of the courses because they'd be like, you've already been through it. You're just waiting on your slot. Whatever. And I actually elaborated on this before. I was actually assigned the 3rd of the 20th, which is totally not typical of how they run. What typically happens in the National Guard is that you stay organically assigned as far as like your roster and responsibility to your old unit, and once you make it through selection, then you get transferred to the Special Forces National Guard unit. In my case, for whatever reason, maybe because I did make it through those training courses so quickly, and like I really was doing well, like I had a lot of promise. I was actually assigned. I actually came down orders 4th or the 20th. I actually knew what Special Forces MOS I was going for, which was 18 Echo. I was going to be a communications sergeant. I didn't exactly know which ODA I'd go to, but within the National Guard unit, there's many ODAs. I had a good idea of which one I was going to. So basically, I just had to go through my training and get it done, and I was all set to go. But let me just tell you what these training weekends were like. Oh man, I get like shivers just thinking about it. So you get there on Friday night to Camp Landing. Friday night, like nothing's going on. They just they do some safety briefings. They basically tell you, watch out for snakes, don't die, drink water. If you die, it's gonna suck for us, so please don't. More or less. And then Saturday morning, you wake up, and so in the regular Army, you might do a PT test like officially once a year, maybe twice a year, and they're all kind of a joke. Like, I don't know. PT isn't taken as seriously. And when I say PT, I mean physical training. Isn't taken as seriously as I would like it to see it taken by the military. So you might go through your whole military career and never have to do like a serious physical training test, just depending on the unit you're in. The way that the drill weekend, and like when you do a PT test in the regular Army, that might be like your one day's event. You do a PT test, and the rest of the day, like you'll have classroom activities because they're like, oh, you did a PT test this morning, you must be tired. That's actually how you start your morning on Saturday with the National Guard guys. You wake up, you do a PT test. But it's also like when you're in the environment, I can't explain to you how invigorating and how motivating it is, because I hope I can set this scene for you, and I hope I can do it justice, because this, like, I'm telling you, I get chills. Like, I'm literally getting chills going back in these memories, because you feel so awesome. So the Army is all about rules and standards, and like you always have to wear your uniform correctly. Your hair has to be cut to a certain way. Like, you all know this. The Army is legendary about, the military is legendary about like shining your shoes, that sort of thing. Getting up super early, just like making things harder than they need to be. That's just the military way, right? The Special Forces guys are not about that life at all. It's totally different. So now imagine this. So Camp Landing is this big, really busy National Guard base. And there's all kinds of stuff going on. Like, especially during the summer, all of the regular National Guard units are doing their annual training. A bunch of like juvenile hall detention sort of facilities run camps there. There's a big drug interdiction force that trains there. Like the DEA does training there. The FBI does training there. So it's a really busy place, but it's all very regimented. So you just see like soldiers marching everywhere, and like everyone's in uniform, and like everyone's like super soldier, right? Like, especially being in the National Guard, everyone's like trying to like act very soldierly for that short period of time that they're actually doing soldierly things. And then you have like these group of SF guys, and I'm not kidding you. So we would have our PT test in the morning on Saturday. So you actually sleep over at Camp Landing on Friday night, which even that is totally different, because they would be like, hey, you can sleep here, you can sleep in the hotel, we don't care what you do, just show up on Saturday morning, which is totally not how the military runs. That's how the SF guys would run their thing at Camp Landing. You wake up to do your PT test, and in the Army, you always wear a PT uniform. It's a pair of shorts, t-shirt, and now they always want you to wear like a reflective belt for safety, so like no cars hit you. It's ridiculous. It's one of the inside jokes of the military is about how you put a PT belt on everything for safety. When we would run our PT test, I remember like it was really hot one day, and like one of our guys was like, "Hey, Sergeant," asking the SF cadre, like, "Do you mind like can I take my shirt off?" And SF cadre's like, "I don't care what you do. Like, you can run around this base naked, just like pass this PT test." So seriously, like, we'd be running in shorts and no shirt. Like, people had earphones in, like their earbuds in. And I know like a lot of like purists are looking at that and being like, oh, that's just like, that shoots down military protocol and that's a lack of discipline. But in actuality, given what we were about to endure for that weekend, like every little luxury like that where you kind of felt a little bit special was the little ounce of motivation that helped you get through what you were about to endure that no other soldier was being asked of, because those weekends would suck. We would do that PT test, right? So as soon as you're done with that PT test, and here's the other thing, how the Special Forces challenge you, is they don't give you full directions for anything. The idea is to treat you like an adult and see how you deal with like autonomy and responsibility. So they won't like when you go on a rucksack march in the regular army, there'll be a packing list where they tell you specifically put this in your bag, put this in your bag, put this in your bag, fold this in a certain way, put this in this area. There'll even be a diagram telling you what your bag should look like, and when you lay out all of your equipment, it should look like this. Well, when you're going to a ruck march and like preparing for special forces, it's not like that at all. They literally just have a marker board, and it'll just say like show up here, have 50 pounds, don't be late, have this uniform on, and that's it. And you don't know like what you're about to do. You don't know if you're going to ruck march. You don't know and that's a big deal because you might do certain things to prepare for a ruck march that you might not do to prepare for an obstacle course or the other way around. So by not knowing, you just show up with your equipment. You're like, what are they going to do to us? And I'll never forget that very first drill weekend, and none of them were as bad as this first one. We just started ruck marching after our PT test on Saturday. And I'm not kidding you. We just ruck march until Sunday. I know that doesn't sound that, like, maybe that does sound bad, but it's not even doing it justice. So we put these 60-pound bags on, and the first thing we did, I think, was a forced ruck march. So they said, okay, I think they don't tell you the distance, but there was this big square course, and I think it was like a quarter mile by a quarter mile, so like a square mile. And they were just like, ruck. And so they were like, we'll tell you when to stop. And you literally just went in a big square with a ruck on your back. And basically, some of us, like, they tell you not to run with your ruck on, but ultimately you start running with your ruck on. And, like, in my case, I would run every quarter mile. I would run a quarter mile, walk a quarter mile, run a quarter mile, walk a quarter mile. And you just keep doing it. I think we ultimately did, like, 10 miles. All right. So they're like, okay, you did 10 miles of that. And then you ate some lunch. And then they're like, okay, have your ruck. Bam, be ready. Then they took us way out to the woods. And we just started rucking. They give us some coordinates on the map, and they would like assign team leaders, and they would like rotate us out through team leading, and they'd be like, okay, find this point, and they'd be like, dude, that's 20 miles away. They'd be like, yeah, start walking. And so you would start walking to this point. Well, then when you get to that point, you're like, oh, this is good. There would be an activity. Like there'd be like a down pilot, which would be this huge sandbag that weighed like 250 pounds. And they'd be like, listen, that's a down pilot. You're rescuing this pilot. He's paralyzed. If he touches the ground, you're going to kill him. Put him on your shoulders. You need to get him to the extraction point. They give you a plot on the map, and you find out the extraction point's 15 miles away in sand. This whole time is in sand, by the way. It's on what they call tank trails. So you had the rucksack on, and then you're carrying like this down pilot out. And then you think that's your one activity, you're done. No, you get to that, then they're like, we had something where there was a rope, and we had to carry a rope. It was just like... And the thing with that is, if you didn't find an intuitive or like a ingenious way of like roping it up, you had to carry it with your hands. And imagine like trying to grip onto something for like 10 miles. So ultimately, I'm not even kidding you. We probably rucked that first weekend. I remember doing the math, like figuring out how far we went. Like I went back and plotted everything out on the map. Between Saturday and Sunday, we rucked like 40 some miles. It was insane. And at night, you did land navigation. So still, all of it with your rucksack on. So at night, instead of sleeping, we did night navigation, where they just give you plots, and you had to go find a point, and then you find that point, you come back, and the whole time you're doing it with a rucksack on. You also don't know how much time you have. They just tell you, find this point, then you don't know how many points you're going to find. You get to every point, and they either say you're done, or they say go find the next point. It's all just to see, like, will you quit? And people are quitting left and right, by the way. But that was my very first, like... indoctrination into the Special Forces rigor, and I'll tell you, nothing was ever as bad as that. That weekend was awful, just the worst. But I did well, like I really did well. So I'll sort of like jump ahead in the story here because I wouldn't be me if I didn't tell you a little bit of some self-deprecating truthfulness to all of this that maybe I should just hide. But so what ended up happening. So I actually get assigned to the 3rd of the 20th Special Forces Group. The cadre there is being super helpful with me. They're like really excited for me to go to the selection. I actually get my selection date. This is when I was at the University of South Florida. I was having a really good time in school. I was really enjoying school. And I really had become a huge University of South Florida football fan. And when you hear how my mind works, you're going to be embarrassed and you're going to cringe and you're just going to probably think worse of me because I think worse of myself when I reflect back on this. And I say that humorously, but kind of truthfully. But no, the truth of the matter is, so I got my orders to go to selection, And it happened to be like September of, I think, 2000 and whenever. But it was in September. And I remember I was getting ready. It was like 2 nights before I was supposed to go to selection. And I started thinking, this is the kickoff of USF football season. And I know this is crazy, but this is the things that were going through my head. I was like, I can go to selection anytime, but I can only experience the college football season with my friends like a few times. And then, you graduate and it's over, and you're never young and a college kid again. And I decided that I wanted to I'd rather stay around for USF college football than I would go to selection. So with about like literally the day before selection, I got cold feet. And I told there the 20th I wasn't going, which really burnt the bridge. That was bad news. Like, you can't do that. You just can't do that. That's like the one thing that the SF guys need is they need people they can trust. And once you show signs of indecision like that, you're pretty much, you basically have demonstrated the one sin that you can't demonstrate, and that's a lack of trustworthiness and follow through, which I clearly just totally put on stage. So yeah, I decided not to go to selection. So think about that. I went through all those training programs. I had hung out with the SF guys for all these drills when I didn't need to. I had totally destroyed my body, and then just got cold feet because I wanted to watch USF football. Stupid, just ridiculous. But yeah, so I didn't end up going to selection then. I ended up returning to my old unit, and it got crazy, and it just. Yeah, it wasn't good. That's when I got really into kind of my dark period, and I started drinking a lot, and I ultimately ended up breaking my leg, which I think we talked about in a different episode. And if we haven't, we'll talk about that, I am sure. But yeah, it sent me down a pretty bad path. But I had fun. I got to watch college football, and I had a lot of fun in college. That was what it was. So I'm not going to digress about much more than that and get all sort of teary-eyed about it. I'm just going to tell you that's how that happened. But ultimately, so the SF guys gave me another shot. So this isn't how it's supposed to be. If you do what I did, you should really be, and I'm not saying this like it's a rule. I'm saying this like if I was an SF guy, I would have never had the time of day for me again after that stunt. But they did. So fast forward a few years later, I'm working in the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm living in Washington, D.C., and I really want to go SF. This is all I'm thinking about. And this time I get serious. And when I say I get serious, I quit drinking, which, as you know through these episodes, that's a prevalent part of my life. I decide I want to go to selection, and I get crazy. I stop drinking. I start eating only meat, and I mean that. I would eat chicken every single meal. And people who know me, who lived with me during that period, know that's true. I would bake all my chicken on the weekend, and then just eat chicken every single meal. So at the time, I was in Washington, D.C. I was living with this family. I was renting a room upstairs of this really sweet family. One was a newspaper journalist, and the other worked for the government. The husband worked for the government. The wife was a real high up for the USA Today. And I just rented the upstairs room. And now imagine, so this is what my daily life was like, and this was every single day. And I'm not kidding you. This is not hyperbole. This is 100% true. I would wake up at 2 in the morning, and go downstairs, and I'd have to sneak because I didn't want to wake up the occupants of the house I was renting from. And they kept their dogs. They had these 2 sweet dogs, and they kept them in the basement, and all my stuff was in the basement. So I'd have to go downstairs. I'm tiptoeing downstairs. I'd wake up the dogs, which hopefully they wouldn't bark. But I'd go and grab my rucksack, this guy, and every day at 2 in the morning before work, I would go ruck marching around Washington, D.C. And I would ruck forever. I lived in Tenleytown. If you're familiar with the area, I would ruck from Tenleytown. I would go down to Georgetown, end up in Arlington. I'd get all motivated. I'd kind of be in the vicinity of the National Cemetery, which, obviously sort of when you are in that lifestyle, it clearly means a lot to you. So that would kind of invigorate me. I'd go from there. I'd actually run out towards Falls Church, which is 10 miles outside the city, and then circle my way back up. Sometimes I would do that route. Sometimes I would actually go from Tenleytown, go all the way out to Capitol Hill, come back up that way. I used to get lost and end up in Maryland. I used to do ruck marches where I'd spend some time in Maryland, end up in Virginia, be in DC, the whole time with the ruck on my back. And the cool thing about DC is, as wild as that sounds, like no one would even bat an eye. Like there's so many crazy people doing such intense things in DC. Like I would literally be rucking down Georgetown so in my ruck sack, which I'm showing again, which those of you who are listening on SoundCloud can't see this clearly, obviously. But in my rucksack, I would have like these hoses which would come out, which were attached to canteens, and so I'd have like hoses coming to a hose to each side of my mouth, and like here I am just like running around with a rucksack on, with army pants on through like Georgetown, this real affluent area of DC, and no one would even say anything. They'd be like, "Oh, crazy SF guy." And when I got out to Falls Church, every once in a while, like people would be like, "Yeah, Rangers lead the way," or like, "Hooah," and I'd be like, "Screw Rangers." But yeah, that actually happened. So I used to do that. So I would get up at 2 a.m. Then after that, so I had a job. I had a full-time job. I worked for the Federal Aviation Administration. I would show up to work. I'm not kidding you. With bloody feet. I was such an animal at the time. I was a straight maniac. I would show up. I couldn't walk with like the heels of my dress shoes because I had to wear like formal clothes to work. I would have such bad blisters on the back of my feet, and I'm looking down at my feet now. I actually have calluses now, but I would literally bleed, and like I would actually, I'm telling you, this sounds psychotic now, but that's where I was at the time. I would actually there'd be like a trail of blood on the floor. I'd have to clean up in the FAA headquarters, but everyone knew what was going on. Like there's a really prevalent military presence in the federal government, obviously. So a lot of people got what I was doing. So everyone knew I was training for selection. So like as weird as it was, people kind of knew what I was doing. So I would do that in the morning. I would go to work, and then at night I would go, and usually I would do sprints. For some reason, I'd usually go on a run at night, but typically I would try to sprint, especially in Tenleytown. We had some hills. I would do hill sprints every night. And then I'm not kidding you, I would go to bed at like 6:30 because I'm telling you, I was waking up at 2 a.m. So I would actually take, I wasn't drinking at the time, but I would take sleeping pills. And so every night I would come home after doing my sprints, I would eat chicken, and then I would take some sleeping pills, and like I would fall asleep till 2 a.m. and do this every single day. Every single day. On the weekends, I would find some other place to ruck. I used to go out to Great Falls, which is a park out by DC. I'd go rucking there. I was training every single day. I was so motivated, just like an animal, just insane. So I ended up joining the North Carolina National Guard. I was actually a member of the Virginia National Guard, but the Virginia National Guard doesn't have any special forces. So I actually was sent to selection through the North Carolina National Guard. And again, like I had to convince them to take me because I kind of had the reputation already of not showing up the first time. So, I was very lucky that they even entertained my second chance. Anyway, so North Carolina National Guard sends me a selection. But before that, I do want to tell you one of the coolest moments of one of the most sentimental, most meaningful moments of my life, something that'll stick with me forever. Where I worked in DC, I worked with a lot of federal executives. Obviously, being in DC, it's like the headquarters of the Federal Aviation Administration, or at least the policy headquarters. So I worked directly for like executives. And a lot of them were retired military personnel, and one of which was for the engineering division that I worked in, the division deputy commander, can't think what the word is, but deputy director, I guess you would say. She was a retired Air Force pilot, maybe not Air Force, whatever the case might be. She used to fly C-130s, so she used to fly C-130s and like airborne soldiers would jump out the back. So she had a soft spot for military, and like we were friends. Like I knew her well enough, but like she's an executive, and I was just like a regular worker. So we didn't interact that often, other than like I'd run into her, and we had a good rapport, but nothing more than that. But right before I went to selection, because you have to remember I went to selection while I was working full time, she actually took me out to lunch, and it was so awesome. She was as excited for me to go to selection as I was to go, and we both were crying as we were having lunch. Like, it was just like, imagine like America, patriotism, like all of that distilled in like a lunch setting, and that's what it was. So yeah, I went to selection. So yeah, I did all that training. I was super prepared. I'm telling you, like, same deal in North Carolina as there was in Florida. You had to go to 3 drills and you had to pass the 3 drills. I did so well in these drills. I mean, I did well at selection, but in the North Carolina National Guard, like, I would destroy everyone. And I know this sounds really arrogant, but it's just a fact of the matter. Like, people would ask me, like, what did you do to train for this? Like, I was actually kind of like the goody two shoes, like the not goody two shoes. That's not the right way of saying it, but like the teacher's pet almost. I would do so well on these things that they just be like, well, Steve got it. Like, of course he's gonna finish this because I prepared. Like, I was an animal. I was insane. This is all I cared about. So when I went to selection, it was a no-brainer. I was gonna kill it. I was gonna kill it. In fact, I was just talking to my mom, well, like I do all the time, but we were actually talking about this whole experience of me going to selection. And again, I don't want to spoil it for you, so I won't tell you exactly what we were talking about, but we'll come back to that. But so I go to selection, and it's everything that I wanted it to be. It was like I had read books. There's this book called Chosen Soldier, which follows a person through selection. I've read that book. It's written by a guy named Dick Couch, who himself is a former, I think, Navy SEAL. I've read a few of Dick Couch's books, but I've read Chosen Soldier. I've read that book multiple times. There's this book called, oh man, I can't even remember what it's called anymore, but this SF guy, this major, or he was a major, I'm sure he's a colonel, and I know he's retired now. He wrote it, and he basically, it was like a cheat sheet to selection. I've read that book over and over. There's a website called professionalsoldiers.com, which is like a forum, like a message board, and it's all Special Forces guys. Like, they're all verified Special Forces, and there's tons of advice there. Like, I was eating and breathing. This is all I thought about for a long period before going to selection, but definitely for that year prior, that's all I thought about exclusively. It's just going SF. So, like, me going to selection, like, I was going to kill it. There was no doubt about it. I was just going to crush it. So, we go through selection. Everything's going pretty well. The biggest event at selection, the one that everyone knows about, is called the STAR course. It's like the culminating land navigation event, and it's called STAR because typically your points, so they give you points that you have to find and then travel to on a map, and those points tend to make a star. So, like, basically you'll start at this point, you'll have to find a point that's, say, 15 clicks, which is kilometers away, but in the way that you backtrack to the next point, you end up making what ultimately becomes a star. And that is known, the STAR course is known, besides like Delta Force, I would say the STAR course is pretty much renowned in the military as being the toughest land navigation course in all of the military. It just is. It's because the distance between points is ridiculous. Like, it's literally, like, most points, when you normally do a land navigation course in the Army, points might be like 2 or 3 miles in between each other. At the STAR course, they're like 15 miles in between each other. You start really early in the morning. You start like 1 in the morning, and they don't really give you I think they did give you a time. They said, like, if you can't find your points, be back by like 2 days from now or something stupid. It wasn't quite that long, but and you can't do certain things. Like, you can't go on the road. You're not even supposed to like track up like next to a road. You're supposed to stay in the trees. And the SF guys are crazy. Like, they drive around on 4-wheelers looking for you. They'll have like nods on, like night vision devices, and they'll be hiding in the trees. Also, you're wearing tracking devices, and they have like a headquarters where they can track everyone. Not so much because they're trying to see if you're cheating, but mostly because people die. Like, overexertion, people will just get exhausted and literally die. So they actually have a heart rate monitor on you that they can track from their headquarters spot. But that's all during the STAR course. You get 2 chances to do the STAR course. If you pass and you get all your points the first time, you only have to do it once. If you don't get all of your points, you do it the second time. The first time I did it, so the way I just said that, you can tell I actually did it twice. So the first time, I was killing it. Like, I found all my points up until my very last point, and it sucked. I'm looking on my map, and I look down, and I know where this point's at. And once you get good enough at land nav, you start doing what's called train association. Because when you're a junior land naver, you do what's called dead reckoning, which is basically you take your compass and you shoot the direction you want to go and you run to it. Like, you'll have a tree in that direction, you run to that tree. Then you have a tree up ahead, you run to that tree, and you keep doing that over and over. When you have a short course, you can do that. But when you have to go 15 miles, like, it's not feasible to do that. So what you do is you kind of lock your bezel on your compass, and you basically you set the direction you want to go, and you just start running. And every once in a while, you'll look down, you'll be like, yeah, I'm generally going the same way. And you have a pace counter, basically like some rocks, whatever, and you're counting. Every time your right foot hits the ground, you count. And you know mathematically how far you've gone based on how many steps you've taken. And once you get to a certain point, you know that you're close to your objective. And then you do terrain analysis. So you look at your map, and you have a map that has like topography on it, and you can see the elevations and like the land features. You can see like grass, or like what's green, what's treed, what's hills, what's a valley, what's like a whatever. But so basically, once you get close to your point, it's not like Dead Reckoning, where Dead Reckoning, theoretically, you would hit your point directly on because you keep tracking towards it. When you're doing like what I was doing, you basically have your bezel and you're just running towards it. Once you get within, say, what you think is like a couple 100 meters of your point, you do terrain association, and you have to plot your point on the map perfectly because you're looking around and you're going, okay, where should this point be? And at the Star Course, the way the points are set up is it's always an SF guy. It's like a retired Special Forces guy who's sitting at the point. And some of them are super friendly. Some of the guys will have, like at night, they'll have huge bonfires so you can see the point from miles away, and they're super nice guys, and they're looking out for you, and they're like, take your load off, like get your feet warm. And then there's this dude. I am at this point, and I had gotten wet. It was early in the morning. It was April in Fort Bragg. I was cold. I started like shaking. I'm pretty sure I had hypothermia. I may have been urinating on myself. Like, I'm telling you, it sounds insane, but like, you get to a point where you're so exhausted and so cold that you stop caring. Like, I almost quit during the Star Course. When I couldn't find this point, because like, I was literally going insane. Like, I was having out-of-body experiences. I was looking at my body shaking. I had hypothermia in South Korea, and this was as close to being that cold as I've ever been. But looking for this point, like, dude, I think I was in a really bad spot. So, but the point being is, I'm looking for this guy, and I'm at this map, and I'm like, I know you're right here. Like, oh, where are you? And I'm getting really frustrated, as you can tell. And so this point on this map, there basically is like a river, and there's like some hills, and this point is like right next to the river. And the thing about when you plot a point on a map is that you can only come within so much accuracy, depending on how long the length is of the point that you have, how many digits are in the location. Is the more digits, the more accurate you're going to be, but you can only get so accurate when you're doing it, human style. So even with a 10-digit grid, you still have a give or take of so many meters, right? So like, I had the point plotted specifically, but not like, I couldn't tell like, okay, it's right here next to the river, but I knew it was in vicinity of the river, right? So I am like walking all around these hills, and you have to think like how frustrated I'm getting, because I had made it to all my other points with great time, and now I'm blowing all of my time. Like, literally, I'd been spending like, I'm on like my hour and a half of looking for this point. Like, at this point, I had found all my other points, I had made it to this point in time, and I just wasted an hour and a half freezing cold, shivering, like full of anger, trying to find this point. And what do you know? This dude, this old SF guy, had found an island in the middle of this river. It wasn't like a river, it was more like a stream, and there was like a bit of land, and he must have waded out there, and he put a camouflage tent up in the middle of like this little strip of land. And like, you don't even think of that, right? Like, you're like, so yeah. So anyway, I ended up finding him, and he wasn't cool at all. Like, he was like, good job, get out of here. Like, he wasn't one of those guys who was like, take your boots off. He was like, go, you need to get going, soldier. It's like, I hate you. But it's tough love, like, right? Like, they all just like, they're trying to make the course tough because, again, you're joining their brotherhood and you're going to be fighting with them. Or in the case of the retirees, you're joining something that's very near and dear to their everything. And that's the thing, is some of these guys that you meet, some of these cadre guys are legends. These are guys who are like POWs in Vietnam. Like, I mean, these are the superstars of the organization. So yeah, like if some old SF guy says you need to get going, soldier, you're like, yes sir, I'm out of here. Like, you have all the deference in the world. So yeah, because of that one point, I had to go on the Star Course the next day. And then the next day I killed it. I just crushed it. Like, I found all my points immediately, and I was done. I was one of the very first finishers. I was done in no time. Like, it was no big deal. In fact, the Star Course the second day, it was almost like a letdown. I was like, really? But I made it through, so that was cool. So I'm making it through selection. The very end of selection is called Team Week, and And I'm gonna start burning through here because this is getting towards the end of the story, but this is really important. So if you've ever watched any documentaries about like the Navy SEALs, they have what they call Hell Week. Well, the equivalent of Hell Week for Special Forces is Team Week. It's always with a rucksack on, and you're just doing team events. And this is like for the first 2 weeks of selection, you were doing like forced ruck marches and runs and all these different challenging things. But for the last week, this is when they're just going to try to physically break you. Like they tell you, like we're going to break you. And I'll never forget. So let me more set the scene here. So you start selection with about 300 of us. By the time it came to team week, after people quitting, we had maybe 150 left. And also, they do kick some people out. Like, they'll make decisions. Like, they'll hold formations and they'll be like, roster number, and they'll start saying roster numbers. They're like, listen, this just isn't for you. And, like, they did shed some guys. So most guys, they would just let them go through the course. And even if they weren't going to select them, they just would let them go anyway. But point being is when team week rolled around, we were down to like the 150 people. And I'll never, dude, this fires me up. And some of this, for those of you who didn't serve, some of this will sound kind of cheesy and corny and over the top. And maybe, especially those of you who are sort of, like I've become a super liberal, you might listen to this and be like, that's sort of the military mindset. That's the problem with the world. But let me just sort of tell you let me set the scene here. The night before selection, so in the garrison area of Camp McCall, you actually have tents and you live in tents, and it's somewhat hospitable. And you have formations, even though like an SF formation isn't like military, it's just kind of like a gaggle. And so anyway, so we're getting ready for team week. We all know team week's coming. We know it's the next day, and that's like the last thing. You have a week. If you can make it through this week of hell, you pretty much have made it, and you're good. So, but I'll never forget. They put us in formation, and there was this cadre member that everyone really looked up to. I don't remember his name. He had been kind of quiet, but we all knew of him, and for some reason, we all sort of like really admired this one guy, right? But he never really like held formation. He was never like really out front. He was just always kind of like in the back. Well, the night before team week, he's the one who holds formation, and you could just see like something change in his whole identity. And this guy who went from being sort of quiet, like that sort of you know how some people have a presence just through their, not by explicitly putting it out there, but you have some respect for them just because they carry themselves in a certain way. Well, that was this guy. But then during this formation, he just holds us out there, and he's just like, this next week is why you're here. He's like, everything you've done is nothing. He's like, and I'll never forget, his whole speech kind of culminated with a couple things, but one of them was him saying, this is going to suck, but you want this to suck. And I'll remember how he said this. He's like, you want to be SF, and like, you want to know that you made it through the hardest thing. You want to be able to go to that team room when you're on ODA, look at the brother to the left of you, look at the brother to the right of you, and know that you've been through the same hell that we've all been through, and like, you did something nothing no one else can do. And like, getting chills right now, the way he had such authenticity when he was talking about, and passion, that like, you were in that formation, you were like, right now, let's go ruck, right now. And then on top of that, he rolls up his sleeves, right? Like, you can see I'm all tatted out too. He was tatted out that same way, except for he had like skulls, and like, not like piles, but like 1 or 2 skulls. And he was like, these skulls are symbolic of the brothers I've lost in missions, in SF missions. He's like, you're joining that brotherhood. He's like, team week is your entrance into joining what they died for. And just the way he said it, and this dude was like almost crying. He was so fired up for team week. Like, you could just tell he waited every selection class just to fire us up for team week. And then team week didn't actually start till the next day, so you get done with this formation and you're like, oh, go to bed. But he fired up. I'm telling you, I have never been so motivated to do anything in my life. Like, I could have went on a one-man team and taken out North Korea on my own, I'm pretty sure, that day. But anyway, so the next day you do team week. They set you up in the teams, and everything is competitive amongst the teams. And my team sucked. We were the worst. We were in last place in everything. Like, we were so bad. So bad. So bad. It was just awful. And then, just to kind of just jump ahead, the entire time, so during team week, so you go through a couple days of it, and the whole time you're just ruck marching, and it's kind of like how it was in Florida, where like every time you get to a certain point, you have a new event. Like you either have to like build a truck, or you might have like a truck that has like one wheel, like literally a truck, like like a pickup truck, and it'll have like one or two wheels, and they'll be like, find a way of balancing this thing out and drag it 15 miles. You're like, what? They're like, just figure it out, candidate. And that's what it's like. But one of the events during team week, I'll never forget. Basically, you get to a point and there's all these poles, like CVC pipes, right? Like just regular poles that you would see in carpentry. And then there's 5-gallon water tanks that are full of sand. So they all weigh like 25 pounds or maybe more. They're all super heavy. And remember, you have your rucksack on, you have a fake weapon, and you have to carry all this stuff. And they're like, listen, you need to evacuate these water cans and these poles. And we don't care how you do it. You had to carry them like 15 miles. And this was the last event of the day. And we had already been walking all day. And so the way we decided to do it, my team decided to do it, is we're going to take the CVC poles and we're going to put them on our shoulders. Remember, we have rucksacks on. Put the CVC poles on our shoulders. And then let the water cans hang between us on the poles, so we would distribute the weight evenly amongst us. And here's where I'm gonna get real like, woe is me. But one of the things that did suck is I was taller than anyone on my team, and like it wasn't because people were like trying to like shirk out on responsibility. I was literally walking, and I would look over at the guy next to me. Literally, the guy next to me was like super short, and he wasn't bearing any of the weight, and like. The only way I could get the pole to rest on his shoulders would be for me to walk lower, but then that's just more intensity on my glutes, like trying to like walk at a squat with a rucksack on and all that. So like, I had to say, I do think I was bearing significantly more weight than a lot of my team members, but that's an excuse. You make it through those things. That was the first step of my undoing, was that one event. It actually crushed my back. Like my back... Like physically, to this day, I really think I pinched a nerve in my back. Like I was in intense pain, but it wasn't the pain that ultimately formed my decision, and it wasn't the fact that I felt like I had to carry more weight. It was none of that. I'll also not remind you. I have to make clear that as I was going through selection, you become really good friends with the people in your tent, and one of which was another forward observer. That was my job in the Army. I was a forward observer, and I became friends with this one guy who was a forward observer. And we grew a really strong bond in like the 24 days we were at selection. And during the star course, he quit. And I remember, I actually like, despite the star course being in an area of like many miles, like there's probably within the whole like area of the star course like land mass, it's probably like, I don't know, an area of like 25 miles, probably more. It's like multiple counties. It's really big. And somehow when he quit, I actually walked up on him and I saw my buddy. And at the star course, you're not supposed to talk to anyone, but you do. And I saw my buddy, and like, I'll tell you, when I saw him quit, it definitely unlocked something in my head. I never, the entire time I was at selection, other than at the star course where I thought I was going to die trying to find that one point, I considered quitting then, only because I considered quitting because like I seriously thought I was going to die. Like, I was like, dude, if I don't quit, like, but I didn't, and I made it through, and I found the point, and I ultimately completed the star course. But when I saw him quit, something like I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I can feel, like, I can internally feel the sensation that went through me. And it was like the idea of quitting became a reality. So, after that day of team events, and I don't remember what day it was. It wasn't day 1, but it was like day 3. It wasn't like the end of team events, but it was like right in the middle. So that night, also, I should tell you, so they break you up into teams, and though my team sucked, and I mean that, like we performed very poorly, like we came in last in like all of our events, we were we all loved each other, like somehow. So when you come to selection, everyone comes to selection from throughout the Army. Like I was in the National Guard. There's some guys who joined the Army just to go to the selection, and they go through a special training program before they even go to selection. There's guys who came from the Army, so like none of you know each other. But you get put on like these random teams, and it just so happened that the team I got put on, we were all like-minded. Like we all were insane, and I mean that. And I know I'm digressing all over the place here, but I think this is fun. I hope you're enjoying this. But like when you first get the selection and you get to your tents, so you're in your tent and it's you and your team, and they tell you, okay, when you're in your tent, you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to sleep. You can do whatever you want, but you can't eat, you can't sleep. So I'm not even kidding you. We get to our tent, and the first thing we do, we all get there and we all look at each other and we all immediately go, how do we sleep? And like, I'm telling you, no other tent did this. Within like a minute of us being together, we posted a guard at our door who would look out for cadre, and we all just immediately started eating and sleeping. In fact, during the course, cadre actually snuck into our tent from like the back somehow, and they caught all of us sleeping and eating. And instead of us getting in trouble, this cadre guy, he looks at us and he's like, you guys, he's like, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And he's like, that's the Special Forces way. Like, you're supposed to find, if we tell you you can't do it, you find a way of doing it. And so they were actually kind of proud of us. And I know none of the other tents were doing that. In fact, the other tents actually hated us. They were like, you're going to get caught. You're going to ruin it for all of us. And we were like the tent who was like, screw you. Like, I don't know. We were pretty arrogant. We were all like, we were punks, but we were good. Like, oh, well, no, we weren't. No, that's not true. At team events, we actually sucked. But, like, we were all very close. Like, I don't know. We were all in the like mindset of, I don't know. We all just got along well. And, like, when we all got back to the tent, we all, like, we liked talking to each other. It was just this weird mix where it just happened to be that the 12 people they put together in that particular team just happened to be like-minded personalities. Where in the other tents, it wasn't true. Those guys would be fighting. Like, there was actual fist fights. And, like, just you would hear like drama. It would be like high school drama in these other tents, and then there'd be us, and we'd just be like, this is the greatest time of our lives. So I'm right in the middle of team events, right after that event where I felt like I crushed my spine. That night they say, well, guess what, we are shifting all of the teams. And I really want to set the scene here because this is literally how it happened. So here's how it happened. So they say, we're going to switch up the teams. And first of all, that's a heartbreaker for me because I had come to love my team. Also in the back of my head, my best friend who was on my team, he had just quit, so he's no longer there. And now I have all this stuff going through my head. My back hurts really bad. And now for the first time, I have this flicker of thought of quitting. And then they tell us they're going to break up our team. And I was just like, what? So they tell us to bring all of your equipment into the middle of like the garrison area, and they're going to reassign teams. And so they do. So you bring out all your stuff, and I was literally, I just leaned back in my chair because this is how it was. I put all of my stuff in my area, and I'm sitting on my stuff. And they go, okay, well, roster number, whatever my roster number was, you're now on team 7, whatever team. I literally didn't move. The idea was you're going to go then take your stuff and move it into your new tent. So everyone scatters, everyone's gone, and cadre doesn't care what you do. Like, they don't care. It's SF. Like, they're very mature about everything. So they assign me to a new tent, and I just sit there on my stuff. Like, I was in my own world. I'm just sitting there, like, staring at the sky, like, in La La Land. And I just remember, like, minutes go by, hours go by. And I'm just sitting on my stuff, whatever, right in the middle of team week. And then finally I carry my stuff into the tent. And you have to pull guard at night. Like, this is a military thing. You always pull fire guard. And, like, so on that night, I don't sleep. Or if I did, I slept for maybe an hour. Like, it was nothing. And I carry all my stuff to my new tent. I wake everyone up, you know, like super early because I was awake. I hadn't gone to sleep. And I tell my new team, hey guys, I'm going to quit. And like, it was pretty insane because I had set up a reputation. Like, I had done so well to that point that like, everyone just assumed I was going to make it through the course and I was going to be selected. But I'll never forget. So all my stuff is in my new tent. It's like 4 in the morning or some time in the morning. But you have to remember, we've been not sleeping like this entire course, so obviously we could all deal with the mornings. But I walk up to cadre's building, their hooch, I knock on the door. This big, tall cadre guy who I really respected, he answers the door. He just looks at me very plainly. I say to him, hey Sergeant, I think I quit. He doesn't like try to persuade me, he doesn't ask me why. He just looks at me and like he had this very dry wit where he was like, I don't remember his exact words, but he said something akin to, I guess you just can't handle an early morning, can you, son? And, like, it was so defeating. I was just like, ugh. He was like, all right, well, take your stuff and go over there. And that's it. That was the end of my selection. I literally just walked over. I ended up staying there until the whole selection course was over. And then at the end, I remember, so the very last event of selection is called the Trek, where you just go on one last really long ruck march. Obviously, I didn't go on it because I was no longer participating at that point. Once the Trek is done, they break everyone up into formations, and they say, okay, well, you guys have all completed selection. We're going to call out some roster numbers. Some of you go to this formation, some go to this formation. One of these formations is people that we're selecting. One is a formation of people that we're going to send home and say, come back again some other time. And, like, I'm watching this. Like, I'm in, like, the losers part of camp, but I'm sitting there watching it. And, like, you know, everyone's in their own world at the time, because during team week, it's such a torture fest that, like, you're in your own world. So people don't, like, my old friends, after we broke up teams, they lost track of me, right? So they don't know what's going on with me. And, like, all of these people get selected, and they're all in the formation where they're getting ready to go back to continue on their special force training. And they see me over, like, in the loser land. And, like, they're all like, what the hell happened to you? Like, you, what are you doing over there? And, like, I quit. Like, I just had to suck it up, tell them I quit. And this goes back to the conversation I just had a couple days ago with my mom. So when I actually went to selection, my car, I actually drove down to Fort Bragg from where I was living in D.C., so I parked at Fort Bragg. I got in my car, and first of all, my phone dies immediately. I had so many messages that as soon as I turned it on, it just died. But once it got charged up and I called home, and, like, my mom literally thought I was joking when I told her I didn't make it. She was like, yeah, whatever. And, like, this is the conversation we were having a couple days ago. She's like, it took me, this is my mom talking, she's like, it took me forever to believe that you actually meant that you didn't make it. And I didn't. And so I want to make it really clear, like, I quit. And there's this old joke that at Camp McCall at selection, there's kneecaps everywhere. And what does that mean? They say that there's kneecaps everywhere because everyone who goes to selection who doesn't make it, they always come back to their unit or back to their friends and they say, oh, I blew out my knee, so I couldn't make it. Like, I was physically restricted from making it. When 9 times out of 10, if you didn't make it, it's because you quit. And so they say that there's busted kneecaps everywhere. It really just means there's a ton of people who quit who aren't willing to admit that they quit. Well, quitting isn't cool. Quitting sucks. But I at least have the pride to know that I can at least admit if that means anything. Like, is there any real pride in admitting that you quit? But I'll never hide it. Like, I never try to tell anyone that, like, though, yeah, I really do believe I pinched a nerve in my back. Like, that's not the reason. I quit because, I don't know, I quit because I was kind of heartbroken that they changed our teams. And in that one moment of, like, weakness, I made a decision that that still affects me. So that pretty much sort of tells you all about that. And I just want to kind of drive on just a little bit to kind of finish this up and just tell you the ramifications of that decision. So, like I said, I wasn't drinking up till I went to selection. I'm not even kidding you. So, like, the day after I got back from selection, I, like, immediately went to a bar. My drinking got so bad, that's when I started writing my craft beer blog. Everything just spiraled downhill, especially towards alcohol from there. Like, everything I had rectified immediately went down the drain. And, like, immediately, like, everything I had done in life was, up until that point, from the time I was about 20 until then, I was probably, like, I think 29 when I went to selection. So for, like, a decade, everything had been done in the context of, I'm going to be Special Forces one day. So, like, I had lived a life where, like, I didn't make a ton of friends in DC, but, like, I did it purposely. Like, I literally, at that time, I didn't want to make friends because, like, I knew I was going to go back to selection. I wanted to be single. I wanted to, like, have no roots. I wanted to be able to just, like, go do secret awesome missions. And, like, if I was going to be an animal, I didn't want the embarrassment of, like, having to explain to everyone, why are you getting up at 2 a.m? Like, so I lived a super solitary life. And like I said, I wasn't drinking. I literally was only eating chicken. And, like, everything I had done was, like, in this maniacal, focused way of becoming Special Forces qualified. So when that didn't happen, and to this day, I still haven't found a way of filling that gap. And it sucks, man. It's awful. Like, I still, like, you can hear it in my voice probably. Like, I can't. That's why, like, I really like web developing. I like coding. I feel like it's a real, but even there, when I was talking to my mom the other day, I was explaining that I can't say I have regrets about anything in life because every decision I made, I feel like I would make the same decision given the information I had at the time. But I wish there was some way of me having gained all of the experience I had, like, say, in college, and all the fun I had in college, and, like, the experience of moving out to California and working in Washington, D.C. I wish I could have experienced all of those and yet stayed in the military somehow. Because that's, like, to this day, I still feel like that was my calling. Like, it had everything for me. I'm a self-sufficient person, but I need structure. Because left to my own regards, I'm sort of not self-destructive. That's not the right way, because I'm not a mess. But like I just do better when things are sort of structured for me. Because like left to my own devices, I don't know. It's not that I get lazy. I can't stay focused, and I just like I don't prioritize very well, unfortunately. And so like I didn't know it at the time, but the military was giving me something that I didn't want, but I didn't know at the time I needed, and I did, and I still do, I think. And then on top of that, like the things that make you successful in the military are things that I was capable of doing. So like physical fitness, obviously I'm really into. Well, obviously, I mean, like you've heard me talk about running. If you follow me on social media, I'm always posting my running stats and stuff like that. Like I love fitness, along with music. It's probably the one constant in my life. Is like I literally every single day. There hasn't been a day in years. And I'm not kidding. Well, that's not true. I have actually missed a day when I was on vacation. But up until that one day, I haven't missed like a single morning of running at least 2 miles, and normally 4. But and I usually lift weights every morning, but I at least run 2 miles every single morning. And in the military, that's advantageous. So I was good there. Like I'm not like a genius, but I'm smart enough that like my intellectual curiosity was just enough to make me like, you know, a good performer in the military. And even like other things like in some cases, if I feel like I never felt any sort of social anxiety in the military. Like, so when you become a sergeant, you have to go to a course called, they keep changing the name. It used to be called Professional Development Leadership Course. It became the Warriors course. Basically, you have to go to a course where they teach you how to like lead in the sense of like giving courses and stuff like that. And I remember when I went, because I was a sergeant, when I went to, I think it was called the Warrior Leadership Course then, I remember that there was things where I could imagine me being nervous. Like you had to stand up in front of a class and give a course. And like in the context of the military, I was never nervous. For some reason, so long as I was in the military, like the environment of the military, it made me feel like I was at home. And then, just to bring it back to modern times, just yesterday I was at a, I'm looking for a job, so I was actually at a nonprofit where they help military, it's veterans, helping veterans find jobs. And man, I just felt like I was at home. Like it's weird because like my politics have changed, and like I'm a pacifist now, so like I might not necessarily agree with the missions, and like my idea of patriotism is totally different now. But when it comes to the type of people that the military attracts, those are like my people. And now, especially within the SF community, it attracts like these super unique, really intriguing individuals. When I was in the Florida National Guard, one of the other candidates was this kid who had a master's in Russian and was getting his doctorate in mathematics. So like he would talk about like physics in Russian. One of our cadre members had just finished law school and was taking the bar. That's like the class of people you meet in special forces. It's a lot of people who were professionally successful and like had like a midlife crisis and decided they wanted to join the military, but they didn't want to join like the army. They wanted to do something more that they thought was significant. So like you get a lot of accomplished, really awesome people. And like I really felt like I gained strength from the sort of just a superior class of people I was around. Like all of those people, to this day, I'm telling you, like I see people on Facebook and they don't even know me. Like they've only interacted with me once or twice, but they don't realize they've had a profound impact on my life. There's a guy down in Florida who's in the National Guard. I won't mention his name, but he went to the University of Tampa, and he was an SF guy, and he actually is the guy who got me back into the National Guard. And he was just SF through and through. Like he just acted like an SF guy, super A-type personality, CrossFitter, 1% body fat, like super awesome dude. And like I see him on Facebook now, and though like I don't necessarily agree with like his politics and some of his takes on things, I still look at him like he's a superhero, and I measure myself. Not I don't say I measure myself towards him. That's not true. I don't give it that much thought, but like I still feel when I think about like what I'm doing in life and what those people have done, I really feel like I missed my calling. Like I really, really do, and it's tough. So like I'm trying to. When you're a person who makes it through life based on like passion and motivation, it's hard to fill that gap, and I haven't been able to yet. And I'm hoping coding is it, and every day I try to make coding it, but it's not the same. Just not the same. And unfortunately, like getting too old now, can't go back to do the SF thing, so I'm just kind of vicariously living and watching what other people do and telling my stories, which is fun. But yeah, no, as you can kind of hear, it's something I still really struggle with, and I don't know. There's no real good answer. Like everyone, I'm thankful that people do kind of chime in and say, "Oh, do this," or like, "Don't worry about it." But like, all the words are super kind. But at the end of the day, like I'm always going to have like, I honestly think no matter what I do in life, I am going. They tell you when you're at selection or when you're training for these things, they always say the only thing you can't do is quit. Like whatever you do not quit. Like, do whatever else, just don't quit. They're like, because one day you'll be 60 years old and you'll remember that you quit, and you'll always wonder what if. And like, I'm not 60. I was gonna say I'm not half that, but let's not talk about it. Anyway, I'm at a much lesser age, and I'm already sitting here thinking, man, what if? But whatever. I don't want to. I'm already getting all woe is me, but yeah, it gives you some insight into my character and like what drives me, but. Man, I could talk about SF all day. And like even spending an hour and a half like we just did, I'm telling you, I just scratched the surface. So I'm sure we'll have another episode where I elaborate more on this. But anyway, I hope for like Memorial Day, hearing someone get kind of geeky, fanboyish about Special Forces is something that's appropriate for the holiday, and hopefully it's reminds you of what this is all about. And you'll take some time to think about the Fallen, and otherwise, still eat your burgers and drink your beer and have a good time. Just remember what the point is, and yeah. Anyway, so moving on to some house cleaning things here. So please check the blog, maxresistanceblog.com. If you go to maxresistanceblog.com, you scroll all the way down. There's actually a link that says blog. I've actually been doing some writing, so if you click on that, there's actually a written blog now too. I might do some redesigning of the site just because I want to get some more practice on some coding techniques I want to work on. So if the site changes, that's why. Please follow me on social media, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if there's anything you want to hear me talk about, whatever, just tell me. I like to pretend like there's a ton of people watching these. I know I'm really just talking to my mom right now, but you know what I mean. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.